I have been doing a commentary, or at least making comments, I should say, working through some of Job, the book of Job, in Hebrew, and I'd like to do it with grammar, a grammar analysis, and a commentary as well. And so we did the introduction to the book of Job in the last video. And on this one, I would like to pick up verses 1 or 1 to verse 5. But let me just introduce the section of 1 to 2:13. The book of Job begins with a prologue, which introduces the great drama of why the righteous suffer. We see this in those first two chapters. Written in beautiful prose, it introduces the reader to the entire book. The curtain is drawn back, and all are permitted to enter into the earthly and heavenly sphere to see God's work with his servant. By the way, Job didn't know what was going on, but we are able to see it. The unknown and unexplained occurrences of this world are emphasized. Job never learns why he is suffering. The reader learns that the reason is due to Satan's attack on Job's character. Job always obeys God and even blesses him, and the Lord gives to Job good things. Anyone would respond favorably to this kind of treatment, argues the Satan. In light of this charge, God permits Satan to test Job with personal tragedy and suffering to demonstrate Job's righteous character and his love for God. In showing the reader Job's lack of understanding as to what was happening in the heavenly scene and the cause of his sufferings, the author is teaching an important lesson from the very start. He is teaching that man dwelling on earth cannot understand and explain the reason why certain tragedies and sufferings of life occur. It is a mystery locked in the eternal sovereignty of God. All of this provides a background for the dialogue which starts in chapters 4 and following, where finite man tries to explain the traditional reasons for suffering. They all miss the point, and that is the very purpose of the author's prologue, to teach the inscrutability of explaining man's suffering with certain accuracy. The prologue then begins by describing the exemplary character of Job, and we see this in verses 1 to 5. This is then followed by two heavenly scenes, culminating in two earthly trials for Job in chapter 1, verses 6 to 2:10. In the first heavenly scene, Satan impugns Job's motives for serving God, and God permits Satan to touch everything around Job but his person in verses 6 to 12 of chapter 1. This is followed then by the tragic earthly scene of trial for Job, in which he loses his wealth and his children in 1:13 to 22. Job, however, emerges with implicit trust in spite of the tragic circumstances of his life. In the second heavenly scene, Satan attacks Job's integrity with the challenge that the test has been really too easy in chapter 2, 1 to 5. Touch him personally, Satan reasons, and then Job would curse God. With God's permission, Satan personally afflicts Job, this time with a dreadful disease. But again, on the earthly scene, Job comes forth blessing God even though his wife exhorted him to curse God in chapter 2, 6 to 10. The prologue then concludes with Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, coming to comfort Job. This is in 2:11 to 13. So we begin in verses 1 to 5, looking at the characterization of Job. So I'm going to read the Hebrew and talk about the grammar a bit, along with commentary. It begins, Ish haya ba'eretz uz, Iyov shemo, v'haya ha'ish hahu, tam v'yashar, v'irei Elohim v'sar meira. That is, there was a man in the land of Uz, Job, Iyov was his name. And notice haya here is the Cal perfect third masculine singular from haya. And it's really written in a way that describes humanity as a whole, I believe. And that man, we're told, was Tom, was perfect. Now, Tom means something like upright or perfect in the sense of his uprightness. Um, and he was Yashar. He was notice. We could even say wholehearted. He was upright, straight, and one that feared God and turned from evil. That is, Virei Elohim Vasar Merah. Notice here, Virei is from the root Yara. It's a Cal participle masculine singular from Yara. A fear of God, two words in construct, and turning from evil. Sar is another participle, a Cal participle from the middle weak verb sur. So he turned from evil. Uh, so the book now begins by introducing the reader to Job's uprightness toward God. And the land of Uz, Job's birthplace, was the land of Uz, which is otherwise really unknown. Many suggest that it was north of the Arabian desert and located along the Euphrates River. This would be close to the area where the Chaldeans and Sabaeans lived, who would attack Job's servants. The man named Job, his name, by the way, is uncertain in meaning. It may come from an Arabic word meaning to return to God or to repent, and would depict Job's later action. It could also come from a Hebrew word describing one who suffers a great deal. A final dogmatic decision, though, is difficult to make. He was, notice we're told here about his character, Tom. Job's life is characterized by one who is good or an upright man. The word in the Hebrew, Tom, denotes one who is innocent or blameless. He is without, we could say, moral blemish. He was one who feared God and obeyed him and turned away from evil. And we see this in the participles, Virei Elohim Basar Merah. So Job then was a good man, a righteous man, and this is what the text is saying. Then as we go on, in verse 2, it reads, Vayivaladu lo shiv'a banim v'shalosh banot. That is, and there were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. By the way, 7 is the number of perfection, and so he has like a perfect can I say, family in the way the Lord has blessed him. Notice, Valadu is from Yalad. It's a nifal, imperfect, third common plural from Yalad. And notice the doubling of the vav here is because the noon of the binyan, or the stem, has by progressive assimilation gone into the vav, causing the doubling or the dogish forte. So there was born to him Shiv'avanim, 7 of sons. Notice here the number always happens before the verb, or the noun itself. The number 7 of sons and 3 of daughters, or 7 sons and 3 daughters. So he's describing Job then as an upright man, that the Lord rewarded him with a large family. He had 7 sons, which would represent really a full blessing from God, 7 being the number of perfection. And he had many sons then, which were greatly valued at that time in the East, where he was from, the ancient Near East. And notice, even the Talmud says, happy is he who has sons. This is found in Baba Bathra 16b. So the writer is setting forth Job's great, can I say, blessing. Let me just say this. I personally believe that we're looking at a real person in Job. Many scholars take this more like a parable, describing Job as sort of a symbol of every man. And I think there is that, but I also believe Job is historical. I believe the poetry of the book is not the way that he and his friends would have sat around in dialogue. I think that's a literary genius of the writer of the book of Job. But I do believe that Job was a historical being. My thinking is in Ezekiel, Yehezkiel 14:4, or 14:14, where even though these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in its midst, by their own righteousness they could only deliver themselves, declares the Lord. So I think Ezekiel is connecting Job with Noah and with Daniel. And I think he's seeing these as historical figures. It's interesting, in the New Testament, Jesus speaks of as it was in the days of Noah. And so he takes Noah in Matthew 24 as a literal human being, not as a myth. So I don't agree with many scholars who would do that with Genesis 1 to 11. I would see Jesus as my rabbi, my teacher. And as I read Matthew 24, I believe he saw Noah as a historical being. The same with Daniel, the same with Daniel, where he said, as it was, with Daniel. Notice in Matthew 24, he speaks of Daniel, the prophet, speaking of the abomination of desolation. And so, what about Job? Well, in the New Testament, Job is also mentioned in the book of James. And again, I have no reason to say that James wasn't seeing Job as real as our Lord took Noah and Daniel. For example, in James chapter 5, verse 11, it reads, we count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you've seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings. And so again, I personally have no reason to think that James was seeing Job as simply a literary figure, but not a real person. In the same sense that Daniel and Noah, I believe Jesus is seeing as real people. And like I said, Jesus is my rabbi. If he saw those as real, then I think certainly I have no problem going back to Ezekiel and seeing all 3 as real people. But at any rate, having said that, the book of Job is written in beautiful poetry. Like I said, I think Job was historical person, not a parable. But this is not like a parable. But I believe the poetry and everything was something that the writer, the literary genius that wrote the book, has the speakers who were historical, I believe, speaking in this kind of literary way, which I don't think they actually spoke in such beautiful poetry when they were so historical, but being written, my take on it, is in a beautiful, poetic way to make the book one of the greatest, from a literary point of view, ever written. Then we move on to verse 3. It says, Vayehi miknehu shivat alfetzon u sheloshet alfei gemalim v'chamesh me'ot semed bakar v'chamesh me'ot atonot ve'avuda rabba ma'od vayehi ha'ish hahu gadol mikol b'nei kadam. In my translation of this, I would render it, and it came to pass, or that his possessions, I should say, were 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and a very his can I say his possessions, or literally his work, was very great. Some translate like this avuda, meaning something like he was one who had great possessions, and possessions much, exceedingly. And notice it says, and that man that is, this man, or that man, was the greatest of all the children of the East. So we're seeing how Job was blessed with many possessions. Let me just comment on this. But first of all, let me do a little bit of the grammar. Let me just see here. Basically, Vayehi is used from Hayah throughout here, describing Job's wealth and what he had. A cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Hayah with a vav consecutive. And that man was greater, or was greatest, we could say. We have the comparative use of the mem here, from all the sons of the east. Job had 7,000 sheep and 500 female donkeys. Job's great possessions are given in this verse. The majority of the people who lived in the Middle East in Job's time were nomads who lived in tents and moved to a new location when their pasture lands dried up. It is significant that Job's wealth is measured in terms of his animals and not in permanent buildings or boundaries. He probably lived a semi-nomadic life, since he had teams of oxen and tilled the soil with them. It is also possible that he had a house in a city. We don't know. Camels are known in the Middle East for their endurance, especially in the desert. They can survive on very little food and water, which made them valuable for the caravans which traveled through the desert. Female donkeys were considered of great value, both for their milk and their ease of riding. We see this in Judges, for an example, Judges 5:10. And in that entire area, we are told Job had great possessions. He was more wealthy than any others of the East. Literally, he was the greatest, the Hebrew reads, of all the sons of the East. The area referred to is the land to the east, it is believed, of the Jordan River, which extends into Mesopotamia. It particularly refers, it would seem, to the northern part of the Arabian desert where Job is believed to have lived. Then we move on after describing his wealth and his great possessions of what he had, having a great household. Notice verse 4, V'chalachu vanav v'asu mishtebet ish yomo. V'shalachu v'karu'u lishloshet ach yotehim le'achol v'lishtot imahim. That is, his sons used to go up, or would commonly go, and would make or hold a feast in the house of each of his day, or we could say on his day. And they would send and would invite or call their three sisters to eat and to drink with them. Just a little bit of grammar. The halachu is from halak. It's a cow perfect, third common plural from halak. And it looks like a customary perfect. That is, his sons would customarily go and would make or hold. Notice that asu is the cow perfect first common plural from asa, would hold a feast, and we supply in, understood, the house of each on his day. Uh, they would each go and have a like sort of a party. I don't think it was a wild party, but a party. V'shalachu v'karu'u, that is, and they would send and would call lishloshet achyotehim. They would call their sisters. They had a good family relationship, it looks like. Notice shalahu is the cow perfect, third common plural again, as well as karu'u from kara. The one is from shalach, the other from kara, both cow perfects, third common plurals. So they would send and they would call their three sisters le'achol, to eat, v'lishtot imahim, to eat and drink with them. Notice le'achol is the cow infinitive construct from achal, and lishtot is from shata, to drink, a cow infinitive construct from shata. So they would each have a day where they would have like a party together. Now, the question is, what does all this mean about each on his particular day? Having great wealth, Job's children could enjoy many festive occasions. The Hebrew reads, and his son used to go, would customarily go and hold a feast in the house of each upon his day, is the way I would translate it. Some would interpret the phrase upon his day as meaning upon the birthday of each son. There would be days of festivity that that particular son would host. Feasts were also held for a variety of activities throughout the year, such as the weaning of a child, like in Genesis 21:8, or a wedding, like, for example, Genesis 29:22, or sheep shearing, 1 Samuel 25:2 and following. The text may mean that on each particular feast celebrated during the week of festivities, each son would take a day of the week in which he would have his brothers and sisters into his house to celebrate. Job's family, then, as we said, was a close one. These feasts, I don't believe, were wild parties, or the sisters, I don't think, would have been included. There is no mention of non-family members included, though, in these feasts. So it's focusing upon Job's family itself. So then we come to verse 5. Vayehi ki hikifu yame hamishte, vayishlach Iyov, vayakadeshem, vahishkim baboker, ve'echala olot, mispar kulam, ki amar Iyov ulai, chata'u vanai, uberachu Elohim, bilvavam, kacha ya'aseh Iyov kol ha-yamim. And I would translate this, and it came to pass that when the days of their feast came around, this, by the way, is from the verb nakaf, to surround or come around. And we'll talk about that in a minute. That Job sent and sanctified, would sent and sanctified them. And he rose up early in the morning and he would offer burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. For Job said, perhaps my sons have sinned and they have cursed God in their heart. Thus he would customarily do, Job would customarily do all of the days, all of, I'm thinking, all of the days when there would be this getting together for festivities. Notice here that we have, and it came to pass, hikifu is from the root nakaf, meaning to surround, but I think I would render this in the hifil, perfect, third common plural, as when their days were gone about, that each one would have their day. So when their days came around, and the days of feast for each one of them, then Job would send Vayishlach, and I'm understanding this again as a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Shalach, that looking at what he would customarily do, he would send, and Vayakadeshem, he would sanctify them, set them apart. This is from the root kadash. It's a PL imperfect, a third masculine singular with a pronominal suffix, third masculine plural. He would sanctify them, and he would arise in the morning, vahishkim, from shakam. Notice we have another hifil, third masculine singular from shakam. He would arise in the morning, ve'echala olot, and he would offer up burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. I'm understanding this to mean according to their days of celebration and for each one of them. And notice ve'echala is from the root Allah, to offer up a burnt offering. Here we have a hifil, perfect, third masculine singular from Allah. So he would offer up olod, the number of all of them. I'm understanding this to mean the number of the days that they were celebrating. For he said, Ki amari Yob ulai chata'u, perhaps my sons have sinned. Notice chata, meaning to break a covenant. It's a cow perfect, third common plural. Perhaps my sons have sinned. U verachu Elohim, and blaspheme God bilvavam, in their hearts. Kacha ya'aseh Iyov kol hayamim. Thus Job would customarily do all the days, or we could render this continually. And by the way, Ya'asu is from asa, a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from asa. Job would sanctify them by offering a burnt offering for each son early in the morning. This no doubt refers, I think, to the patriarchal time when the father in each clan acted as a priest for his family, and his offering would atone for their sins. Since Job performs this role, it is my understanding he probably lived before the time of Moses when the priesthood then was established at Mount Sinai. And notice Job is concerned lest his children have turned away from God in their hearts. The Hebrew word here that we rendered to curse most of the time means to bless. It is probably a euphemism for its opposite. Cursing is the perversion of blessing. It was customary to bless a person when you parted company. An example would be Genesis 47:10. To refrain from giving a blessing was considered as bad as actually then cursing the individual. Job was concerned, in my understanding, not so much that his sons would actually curse God outright, but that in their feasting they would forget to bless God. Job, that's sort of an interesting thought. We can get so occupied with doing our own things that we fail to bless him and end up following this type of thinking to cursing him by ignoring him. Job shows his reverence for God then by his concern for the spiritual life of his family. He is not just concerned about religious exercises, but he was a man of deep piety, concerned about the inner motives and heart attitude of his children toward the Lord. So we're being told right from the get go that Job was a very, very righteous man, and yet he's going to suffer immensely. And so, why? That's the struggle of trying to understand the book of Job. Why do the righteous suffer? So, I'm going to stop there. I hope this can help somebody. I'm enjoying working through the Hebrew text and doing grammar, but also commentary. So, thank you for listening.